Captain Jun-ho stood on the bridge of the UES Indomitable and watched the stars through the massive viewing screen that stretched across the front wall of the command center. The ship moved through space at speeds that would have been impossible just 50 years ago, but now felt as normal as walking down a street back on Earth. Behind him, the bridge crew worked at their stations with the quiet focus that came from months of deep space patrol duty along the outer edges of human-controlled territory. The Indomitable was not like the smaller ships that most people thought of when they heard the word warship. This vessel stretched 15 kilometers from bow to stern and carried a crew of 50,000 people who lived and worked in what was essentially a floating city that happened to be armed with weapons that could crack planets in half. The ship had been built as part of humanity's new defense initiative after several border incidents with unknown vessels that had appeared and vanished before anyone could make contact. Earth's military leaders had decided that if humanity was going to explore the galaxy, they needed ships that could handle anything they might encounter out there in the dark between the stars. Jun-ho had been chosen to command the Indomitable because of his experience with first contact situations and his reputation for making smart decisions under pressure. He had spent 20 years working his way up through the ranks of Earth's Space Navy and had commanded 3 different ships before being given this assignment. The responsibility of commanding 50,000 people and the most advanced warship humanity had ever built weighed on him every day, but he had learned to carry that weight without letting it slow him down or cloud his judgment when important decisions needed to be made. The bridge of the Indomitable was designed to give the command crew access to every system on the ship while still feeling like a place where people could work comfortably for long periods of time. The captain's chair sat in the center of the room, surrounded by workstations for the various department heads and senior officers who helped run the massive vessel. Large screens displayed information about the ship's status and the space around them, while smaller displays at each station showed more detailed data about specific systems or areas of responsibility. Chief Science Officer Hye-jin looked up from her station where she had been monitoring the long-range sensor arrays that constantly scanned the space ahead of and around the ship. Her expression caught Jun-ho's attention because it was the kind of look that meant something unusual had appeared on the sensors and required the captain's immediate attention. She had been working on the Indomitable since before it left Earth's orbital shipyards and had become very good at spotting things that did not belong in the normal pattern of cosmic radiation and stellar emissions that filled the empty spaces between star systems. "Captain, we have something unusual showing up on the long-range sensors," Hye-jin said as she transferred the data from her station to the main viewing screen so that everyone on the bridge could see what had caught her attention. "The computer is having trouble classifying these energy signatures because they do not match anything in our databases, but they are definitely artificial in origin and appear to be moving in some kind of formation pattern." Jun-ho moved closer to examine the display that now showed a representation of the space around the Kepler 442 system, where the unusual readings were coming from. The energy signatures appeared as bright spots of light against the dark background of space, and even without detailed analysis, it was clear that whatever was producing those signatures was much larger and more powerful than anything humanity had built. The patterns of movement suggested multiple objects working together in a coordinated way, which meant they were looking at evidence of intelligence behind those energy emissions. "How far away are they?" Jun-ho asked while studying the display and trying to estimate the size and power of whatever was out there waiting for them to discover it. The implications of finding proof that humanity was not alone in the galaxy had been discussed and planned for, but actually seeing evidence of other intelligent life was still a moment that would change everything for the human race and everyone. "Aboard the Indomitable, approximately 6 light hours from our current position," Hye-jin replied as she continued to analyze the incoming data and refine the computer's estimates about what they were seeing. "The signatures are strong enough to be detected at this range, which suggests that whatever is producing them has access to energy sources that are far beyond anything we have developed. Based on the movement patterns, I would estimate we are looking at somewhere between 50 and 200 separate objects, all moving together as a single group." Commander Taemin looked up from the tactical station where he had been running his own analysis of the sensor data with a focus on potential threats and defensive considerations. As the ship's primary tactical officer, he was responsible for evaluating any situation that might require the use of the Indomitable's weapons systems or defensive capabilities. His experience with combat situations and threat assessment made his opinion valuable when dealing with unknown contacts that might represent a danger to the ship and crew. Captain, those energy readings are unlike anything we have encountered before, but the coordination of movement suggests advanced technology. An organized intelligence, Tae-min said, as he highlighted certain aspects of the sensor data on his display. If we are looking at a fleet of unknown vessels, then we need to consider the possibility that our approach might be interpreted as either a threat or an opportunity depending on their intentions and capabilities. Junho nodded as he considered the information that his officers had provided and the various options available to them in this unprecedented situation. The Indomitable had been sent out to patrol the edges of human space and investigate anything unusual that might represent either a threat or an opportunity for peaceful contact with other intelligent species. Finding evidence of advanced alien technology was exactly the kind of discovery that the ship had been designed and equipped to handle, but actually making that contact would require careful planning and consideration of all possible outcomes. Set course for the Kepler 442 system and increase our speed to maximum sustainable velocity, Junho ordered as he returned to his command chair and began the process of preparing his ship and crew for what might be humanity's first contact with an alien civilization. I want all departments to begin preparation protocols for unknown contact situations and make sure that every system on this ship is functioning at peak efficiency. We may be about to make history, but we are going to do it safely and professionally. The bridge crew immediately began implementing the captain's orders as the massive ship changed course and accelerated toward the source of the mysterious energy signatures. Throughout the Indomitable's 15 kilometers of corridors and compartments, the word spread that they had detected signs of alien intelligence and were moving to investigate. 50,000 people began preparing for the moment that humanity had wondered about and planned for since the first time someone looked up at the stars and wondered if anyone else was out there looking back. Fleet Admiral Korith stood in the command center of the hegemony flagship Eternal Dominion and watched the tactical display that showed the positions of the 200 ships under his command as they moved through space toward their target systems. The Armada represented the combined military might of 12 different species that had joined together under hegemony rule over the past 3,000 years to create the most powerful force this region of the galaxy had ever seen. Each ship in the fleet was a masterpiece of biomechanical engineering that combined living tissue with advanced technology to create vessels that could adapt and evolve during combat situations. The hegemony had built its empire through a combination of overwhelming technological superiority and psychological warfare that broke the will of potential enemies before actual fighting became necessary. Most species surrendered after seeing the size and power of a hegemony fleet because resistance seemed pointless against ships that could repair themselves during battle and weapons that could reshape matter at the molecular level. Those few civilizations that chose to fight anyway discovered that hegemony vessels became stronger and more dangerous as combat continued because their biomechanical systems learned from each attack and developed countermeasures in real time. Korith had commanded fleets for over 2 centuries and had overseen the conquest of 17 different star systems during his career with the hegemony military forces. He had learned to recognize the signs of a civilization that would surrender without fighting and those that would choose destruction rather than submission to hegemony rule. The intelligence reports about the systems they were approaching suggested that the inhabitants were a young species that had only recently developed faster than light travel and had not yet encountered any other intelligent life forms in their exploration of nearby star systems. The biomechanical ships of the hegemony fleet were grown rather than built in traditional shipyards, and each vessel was unique in its specific capabilities and characteristics. The process of creating a new ship began with a carefully designed genetic template that was then allowed to grow and develop over a period of several years, while various technological components were integrated into the living structure. The result was a warship that combined the adaptability and self-repair capabilities of a living organism with weapons and defensive systems that surpassed anything that could be created using purely mechanical technology. Zenth worked at the sensor station aboard the Eternal Dominion, where his job was to monitor the space around the fleet and provide early warning of any potential threats or obstacles that might interfere with their mission. His species had evolved advanced sensory organs that allowed them to detect energy patterns and electromagnetic emissions with far greater precision than most other life forms, which made them valuable members of hegemony fleet crews. The sensor arrays on the flagship were designed to work in harmony with his natural abilities to create a detection system that could identify objects and energy sources across vast distances of space. "Admiral, we are detecting an unusual energy signature approaching from the direction of the target systems," Zenth reported as he studied the displays at his station that showed the complex patterns of radiation and electromagnetic emissions that filled the space around them. "The signature does not match any known technology in our databases, but it appears to be artificial in origin and is moving at high velocity in our general direction." Korath moved to examine the sensor data that Zenth had flagged for his attention. While considering the implications of encountering unknown technology in what their intelligence reports had described as a region populated only by primitive civilizations, the hegemony maintained extensive databases of the technological capabilities of every known species in this part of the galaxy, and the appearance of something that did not match any existing records suggested either a significant error in their intelligence gathering or the presence of a previously unknown civilization with advanced capabilities. "What can you tell me about the size and composition of whatever is producing that energy signature?" Korath asked, as he watched the display update with new information as their sensors gathered more data about the approaching object. The readings were unlike anything he had seen in 2 centuries of military service, and the power levels being detected were far higher than what should be possible for a single vessel built by the primitive species they expected to encounter in this region. "The object appears to be a single large vessel approximately 15 kilometers in length with energy output levels that exceed our current measurement capabilities," Zenth replied as he continued to analyze the incoming sensor data and compare it against the fleet's databases. "The hull composition includes materials that our computers classify as theoretical impossibilities, and the propulsion system appears to be based on controlled manipulation of space-time geometry rather than any conventional drive technology." The implications of Zenth's report sent a wave of concern through the command crew of the Eternal Dominion as they realized they might be dealing with technology that was far more advanced than anything the hegemony had encountered in their thousands of years of galactic expansion. The energy readings suggested a level of technological development that should not exist among the young civilizations that inhabited this region of space, according to all their intelligence reports and long-range surveys of the area. "Continue monitoring that vessel and prepare a full analysis of its capabilities," Korath ordered as he considered the various options available to his fleet in this unexpected situation. "I want to know everything we can determine about their technology and intentions before we make any decisions about how to proceed with our mission in this system." The other ships in the hegemony fleet had also detected the approaching vessel and were beginning to transmit their own sensor readings back to the flagship for analysis and coordination. The biomechanical systems of each ship were already beginning to adapt their configurations in response to the detection of unknown technology as their living components instinctively prepared for potential combat situations. This automatic response had served the hegemony well in previous encounters with hostile forces, but the readings they were getting from the approaching human ship were unlike anything their systems had been designed to handle. As the human vessel continued to approach their position, the hegemony fleet began to realize that they might be facing a technological challenge that exceeded their ability to respond effectively. The energy signatures being produced by the single approaching ship were equivalent to the combined output of their entire fleet of 200 vessels, which suggested either incredibly advanced power generation technology or weapons systems that operated on principles the hegemony had never encountered before. The command crews throughout the fleet began to experience something that was almost unknown in hegemony military operations, as they realized that for the first time in their long history of conquest, they might be dealing with an opponent whose technological capabilities exceeded their own. The psychological impact of this realization began to spread through the fleet as officers and crew members who had grown accustomed to overwhelming superiority suddenly found themselves facing the possibility that they might be outmatched by a single enemy vessel. Korath studied the continuing stream of sensor data and tactical analysis while trying to understand how a primitive civilization could have developed technology that appeared to violate several fundamental laws of physics, as the hegemony understood them. The approaching ship seemed to treat the manipulation of matter and energy as routine operations, while generating power levels that should have required the resources of an entire star system to maintain safely. The moment when two intelligent species meet for the first time in the vast emptiness of space is supposed to be one of the most important events that can happen in the history of any civilization, but as the Indomitable approached the position where the alien fleet waited, Captain Junho felt more concern about doing everything correctly than excitement about making history. The protocols for first contact had been developed by Earth's best minds over decades of careful planning and consideration of every possible scenario that might arise when humanity finally encountered other intelligent life, but actually implementing those procedures in a real situation felt much more complicated than any training exercise could prepare them for. Communications Officer Su Jin worked at her station to establish the basic technical requirements for peaceful contact with the alien fleet, while trying to solve the fundamental problem of how to communicate with beings who had evolved completely different languages and concepts of meaning. The communication arrays on the Indomitable were designed to handle this exact situation by broadcasting mathematical concepts and basic physical principles that should be universal, regardless of what planet or star system a species had evolved. But translating those simple ideas into complex diplomatic discussions would require patience and careful work from both sides. Captain, I am receiving responses to our initial contact broadcasts, Su Jin reported, as her equipment began to decode the signals coming from the alien fleet and attempt to establish the basic framework for meaningful communication between the two groups. Their technology appears to be compatible with our translation protocols, and they seem to be following similar procedures for establishing first contact with unknown species, which suggests they have experience with this type of situation. The alien fleet had maintained its position while the Indomitable approached and showed no signs of hostile intent or aggressive positioning, but Junho knew that peaceful appearances could be misleading when dealing with unknown species whose motivations and cultural values might be completely different from human concepts of diplomacy and cooperation. The size and obvious technological sophistication of the alien vessels suggested that they represented a civilization with significant military capabilities and the experience to use those capabilities effectively if they chose to do so. Continue working on the translation protocols and establish a basic communication channel as soon as possible, Junho ordered, while watching the tactical display that showed the positions of both fleets and the energy signatures that each group was producing. I want to begin diplomatic contact as quickly as we can manage it, but make sure that all our defensive systems remain at full readiness in case this situation changes unexpectedly. Engineering Chief Minho monitored the Indomitable's systems. From his station in the main engineering section deep within the ship's hull, where the controlled singularity that powered the massive vessel hummed with barely contained energy that could supply the needs of a small planet. The engineering displays showed that all systems were functioning within normal parameters, but Minho had noticed some unusual readings from the sensors that were scanning the alien vessels and trying to analyze their technology and capabilities. Captain, we are getting some interesting data about the construction methods used by those alien ships, Minho reported through the communication system that connected his engineering station with the bridge. Their vessels appear to be some kind of hybrid between biological organisms and mechanical technology, which explains some of the unusual energy signatures we detected during our approach. The combination of living tissue and artificial systems is unlike anything we have seen before, but it appears to be quite sophisticated. The revelation that the alien ships were partially alive added another layer of complexity to the first contact situation, because it suggested that the beings they were dealing with had developed along completely different technological pathways than humanity had followed. The implications of biomechanical technology raised questions about how these aliens might view purely mechanical constructions like human ships, and whether they would consider the Indomitable to be some kind of primitive or inferior design, because it did not incorporate living components. Aboard the hegemony flagship Eternal Dominion, the sensor readings from the approaching human vessel continued to provide information that challenged everything the aliens thought they knew about the technological capabilities of the species in this region of space. The energy output from the human ship exceeded the combined power generation of the entire hegemony fleet, while the materials used in its construction included substances that their computers insisted could not exist under normal physical conditions. Fleet Admiral Korath found himself in the unprecedented position of commanding a fleet that might be significantly outmatched by a single enemy vessel, and the psychological impact of this realization was beginning to affect the performance and morale of his crews. The hegemony had built its empire on the foundation of overwhelming technological superiority, and the sudden appearance of a potential opponent with more advanced capabilities threatened the basic assumptions that had guided their military doctrine for thousands of years. "Admiral, the human vessel is broadcasting what appears to be peaceful contact protocols," reported the communication specialist who had been monitoring the transmissions from the Indomitable and attempting to decode their meaning using hegemony translation technology. "They seem to be following standard first contact procedures and are not showing any signs of hostile intent. But we should consider the possibility that this could be some kind of deception designed to lower our guard before they attack." The biomechanical systems of the hegemony ships had been continuously analyzing the human vessel since it first appeared on their sensors, and the data they were collecting painted a picture of technological capabilities that seemed almost magical. In their violation of what the aliens considered to be fundamental limits on engineering and physics, the human ship appeared to manipulate matter and energy with casual ease while generating power levels that should have required the resources of multiple star systems to sustain safely. "Establish communication with the human vessel and begin following standard first contact protocols," Korath ordered, despite his growing concerns about the technological disparity between the two fleets. "We need to determine their intentions and capabilities before we can decide how to proceed with this encounter, but make sure that all ships maintain full combat readiness in case diplomacy fails to resolve this situation peacefully." The translation systems on both sides worked to establish the basic framework for meaningful communication, while the crews of both fleets watched their sensors and waited to see whether this historic first contact would lead to peaceful cooperation or become the opening moments of a conflict between two very different civilizations. The human crew of the Indomitable approached the situation with careful optimism, while following procedures that had been designed to minimize the risk of misunderstandings or accidental provocations. The alien crews of the hegemony fleet found themselves dealing with emotions and situations that were almost unknown in their long history of galactic conquest, as they realized that they might have encountered a species whose technological development had progressed far beyond their own capabilities. The psychological impact of this discovery was amplified by the fact that their entire civilization was built on the assumption that they represented the peak of technological achievement in this region of the galaxy. The careful diplomatic dance between the two fleets continued for several hours as both sides worked to establish meaningful communication and demonstrate their peaceful intentions while maintaining the defensive readiness that prudent military commanders required when dealing with unknown forces. Captain Junho felt cautiously optimistic about the progress they were making in establishing basic communication protocols with the alien fleet, but he remained aware that first contact situations could change very quickly and that a single misunderstanding could transform a peaceful encounter into a deadly conflict that neither side really wanted. The translation systems had progressed to the point where simple concepts and intentions could be communicated between the human and alien vessels, but the complex ideas and cultural nuances that would be necessary for meaningful diplomatic negotiations still required much more work and patience from both sides. Sujin reported that the aliens seemed to be genuinely interested in peaceful contact, but she had also detected what appeared to be military communications between their ships that suggested they were analyzing the Indomitable's capabilities and discussing tactical options in case the situation deteriorated. "Captain, we are making good progress with the communication protocols, but I think we should be aware that the aliens are definitely conducting some kind of military analysis of our ship and its systems," Sujin reported from her station, where she had been monitoring both the diplomatic communications and the background transmissions between the alien vessels. "They seem nervous about something, and I am detecting increased activity in what appear to be their tactical and sensor networks." The aliens had good reason to be nervous because their analysis of the human ship had revealed technological capabilities that exceeded anything they had thought possible and suggested that they might be dealing with representatives of a civilization that could pose an existential threat to the entire hegemony if they chose to do so. The energy signatures from the Indomitable indicated weapon systems that could potentially destroy planets and defensive technologies that made their most powerful attacks seem like ineffective gestures against an overwhelming opponent. Engineering. Chief Min Ho initiated a routine diagnostic cycle of the Indomitable's primary systems as part of the standard maintenance procedures that kept the massive ship operating at peak efficiency during long patrol missions in deep space. The diagnostic required temporarily cycling power through all major systems, including the weapons arrays and defensive shields, to ensure that everything was functioning within acceptable parameters and ready for immediate use if circumstances required rapid response to threats or emergency situations. The power surge that accompanied the diagnostic cycle was a normal part of ship operations that the human crew barely noticed, but to the alien sensors that had been carefully monitoring every aspect of the Indomitable's energy output, it appeared to be preparation for an imminent attack. The sudden spike in weapon system activity and the cycling of what appeared to be planet-killing energy weapons created panic among the hegemony fleet commanders who interpreted the human actions as the prelude to a devastating first strike against their forces. Aboard the hegemony flagship, Fleet Admiral Korath watched in growing alarm as his sensor operators reported that the human vessel was bringing its weapons systems to full combat readiness while maintaining the pretense of peaceful diplomatic contact. The combination of overwhelming technological superiority and apparent deception suggested that the humans were planning to eliminate the hegemony fleet before word of their capabilities could reach other hegemony forces and warn them about this new threat to their civilization. "Admiral, the human vessel is powering up weapon systems that exceed our ability to measure accurately," Zenth reported from his sensor station, where the displays showed energy readings that had climbed beyond the upper limits of their detection equipment. "Based on our analysis of their technology, we estimate that a single shot from their main weapons could destroy multiple ships in our fleet, and their defensive systems appear to be strong enough to withstand concentrated fire from our entire force." The psychological pressure of facing an opponent with such overwhelming technological advantages had been building throughout the hegemony fleet, as their crews realized that everything they had believed about their military superiority was being challenged by the casual display of power from a single human ship. The apparent preparation for attack was the final factor that broke the nerve of one of the junior commanders who commanded a squadron of fast attack vessels that had been positioned on the flanks of the main fleet formation. Sub-Commander Vectus made the decision that would change the course of the encounter when he ordered his ship to fire on the human vessel with their most powerful weapon in what he intended as a preemptive strike to protect the fleet from what seemed like an inevitable attack. The plasma cannon that fired from his ship represented the pinnacle of hegemony weapons technology and was capable of cracking the crust of a planet or vaporizing a small moon. But when its energy beam struck the Indomitable's defensive shields, the result was barely noticeable to the human crew. "Captain, we just took what appears to be weapons fire from one of the alien vessels," Tae-Min reported from his tactical station, where the defensive systems had automatically registered and deflected the incoming attack without requiring any action from the crew. The energy level was relatively low, and our shields absorbed it completely. But this obviously represents a significant escalation in the situation that requires immediate response. The failure of their most powerful weapon to have any visible effect on the human ship sent waves of terror through the hegemony fleet, as they realized that their fears about being completely outmatched had been proven correct in the most dramatic way possible. The plasma beam that should have been capable of destroying any known vessel had been absorbed by the human defensive systems as if it were nothing more than background radiation from a distant star. Captain Jun-Ho found himself in the difficult position of needing to respond to what was clearly an act of aggression while still hoping to salvage the first contact situation and avoid a larger conflict that could have serious consequences for future relations between the two species. The attack had been relatively minor and could possibly be explained as an accident or the unauthorized action of an individual commander, rather than a deliberate decision by the alien leadership to begin hostilities. "Return fire with minimum necessary force," Jun-Ho ordered, after considering the available options and deciding that some kind of response was required to demonstrate that attacks on human vessels would not be tolerated while still leaving room for diplomatic resolution of the situation. "Use a single shot from our smallest point defense turret and target the vessel that fired on us, but try to minimize the damage so we can still continue negotiations." Tae-Min selected one of the Indomitable's point defense weapons that was designed to destroy incoming missiles and small attack craft rather than engage major enemy vessels, and fired a single brief pulse at the alien ship that had attacked them. The beam that emerged from the human weapon was intended as the minimum possible response to demonstrate their defensive capabilities while avoiding unnecessary destruction, but its effect on the alien vessel was far more dramatic than anyone on the human ship had expected. The energy beam from what the humans considered to be their weakest weapon system instantly vaporized the alien attack ship and two other vessels that happened to be in close formation nearby, while sending shockwaves through the hegemony fleet that caused several more ships to lose power and drift helplessly in space. The demonstration of casual, destructive capability that exceeded their worst fears confirmed to the aliens that they were dealing with a species that possessed technology so advanced that resistance would be completely futile. The aftermath of the brief exchange of weapons fire left both fleets in very different states of mind as they tried to process what had just happened and decide how to proceed with a first contact situation that had suddenly become much more complicated than anyone had expected. Captain Jun-ho stared at the tactical display that showed the wreckage of 3 alien vessels and felt a deep sense of regret that their first meeting with another intelligent species had resulted in unnecessary death and destruction that could have been avoided with better communication and understanding between the two groups. The human crew of the Indomitable was shocked by the devastating effect of what they had intended as a minimal warning shot, and the realization that their weapons were far more powerful relative to alien technology than they had understood during the brief diplomatic contact. The point defense weapon that had fired on the attacking alien ship was considered one of their least powerful systems, and was normally used to destroy small missiles and fighters rather than engage major warships, but its effect on the alien vessels suggested a technological gap that was much larger than anyone had imagined. "Captain, we are receiving emergency transmissions from the remaining alien vessels," Su-jin reported from her communication station, where she was monitoring the chaotic signals coming from the hegemony fleet as they tried to coordinate their response to the devastating demonstration of human firepower. The translation system is having difficulty with the emotional content of their communications, but they appear to be in a state of panic and are requesting permission to withdraw from this area of space. The psychological impact of losing 3 ships to a single shot from what appeared to be a minor weapons system had completely shattered the confidence and fighting spirit of the hegemony fleet, as they realized that any attempt to continue the engagement would result in the complete destruction of their forces without having any meaningful effect on the human vessel. The biomechanical ships that had seemed so advanced and powerful just hours earlier now felt fragile and primitive compared to the casual display of technological superiority they had just witnessed. Fleet Admiral Korith found himself in a position that no hegemony commander had ever experienced in thousands of years of galactic conquest as he tried to salvage what remained of his fleet and his reputation from an encounter with an opponent whose capabilities exceeded every assumption that had guided hegemony military doctrine. The loss of 3 ships to a single shot from what appeared to be a defensive weapon had proven that continued resistance would be suicidal, but retreat would mean admitting that the hegemony had encountered a force they could not defeat. "All ships prepare for immediate withdrawal from this system," Korith ordered as he watched the tactical display that showed the remaining vessels of his fleet clustering together in defensive formations that would provide no real protection against weapons that could vaporize multiple ships with casual ease. "Maintain formation discipline and be ready to execute emergency jump procedures if the human vessel shows any signs of pursuing us." The retreat of the hegemony fleet was not the organized withdrawal that their military protocols called for, but rather a panicked flight from an encounter that had challenged everything they believed about their place in the galactic hierarchy. Ships that had seemed invincible just hours earlier now fled through space while transmitting frantic reports about the technological capabilities they had witnessed and the implications of humanity's apparent military superiority over everything the hegemony had thought possible. Captain Jun-ho decided not to pursue the fleeing alien vessels, despite the fact that they had initiated hostilities, because he believed that allowing them to escape would demonstrate humanity's peaceful intentions and might provide opportunities for better diplomatic contact in the future, when both sides had time to process what had happened and develop better procedures for communication and negotiation. The brief exchange had provided valuable information about alien technology and capabilities, while also revealing that human weapons were much more effective than expected against potential threats. "Stand down from combat alert and resume normal patrol status," Jun-ho ordered as he watched the alien fleet disappear into hyperspace and leave the Indomitable alone in the empty space between star systems. "Begin preparation of a full report on this first contact incident for transmission to Earth Command, and make sure that all sensor data and communication records are preserved for analysis by the diplomatic and intelligence services." The surviving ships of the hegemony fleet carried word of their encounter back to their home systems, where the reports of human technological capabilities would spread throughout the confederation of species that made up their civilization. The story of a single human ship that had appeared from unknown space, with weapons that could destroy planets and defenses that made their most powerful attacks ineffective, would grow in the telling as fear and uncertainty replaced the confidence that had sustained hegemony expansion for millennia. Engineering Chief Minho completed his diagnostic procedures and filed his routine maintenance report without realizing that the power cycling that had triggered the entire confrontation was now being analyzed by alien intelligence services as evidence of humanity's casual approach to controlling forces that could reshape matter at the subatomic level. The technical specifications of human technology would become the subject of terrified speculation among civilizations that had never encountered anything that challenged their understanding of what was possible. Navigation Officer Young Su plotted the return course to human space, while the Indomitable resumed its patrol mission along the borders of explored territory. The crew settled back into their normal routines while remaining unaware that their brief encounter with the hegemony fleet had already begun to change the balance of power throughout this region of the galaxy as word spread about the mysterious humans and their impossible technology. Science Officer Hyojin began analyzing the sensor data collected during the encounter with the alien fleet and preparing her preliminary reports on the biomechanical technology they had observed. The information would contribute to humanity's understanding of how other species had chosen to develop their civilizations, but the humans remained unaware that their own technology was being viewed as evidence of godlike capabilities by civilizations that had ruled star systems for millions of years. The legend of humanity's power would grow and spread through the networks of communication that connected the various alien civilizations as the story of the Indomitable's casual destruction of hegemony warships became the foundation for humanity's reputation as the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Ancient empires that had never known defeat would begin reinforcing their borders and questioning their assumptions about military superiority, while younger civilizations would wonder if the humans represented an opportunity for protection or a threat to their continued existence. Captain Junho filed his incident report and recommended that future first contact missions should use smaller and less heavily armed vessels to avoid creating the wrong impression about humanity's intentions, but he had no way of knowing that. His careful diplomatic approach had been overwhelmed by the simple fact that human technology was so advanced that it appeared supernatural to other species. The Indomitable returned to its patrol duties while the galaxy began to reshape itself around the knowledge that humanity had arrived among the stars.